Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, an HOA Karen tries to force my grandma and me to join the newly built homeowner association. We refuse, but the Karen ends up forging my grandma's signature and we sue the entire HOA. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. So I live in this little known corner of Southeast Asia where our neighborhood is like a cozy little nook in a small city. It's mostly filled with sweet parents and grandparents whose kids have moved away to study or work in bigger countries. In early 2020, something new came into the picture, this thing called the Homeowners Association, HOA. I know that these HOAs are fairly common in the Western world, but they are definitely less known around here, although you find them in some cities and they are gaining popularity. People started talking about it and trying to get us to join. They claimed it would bring all sorts of benefits to our neighborhood. Well, the timing was interesting because I had just finished college and, thanks to the pandemic, I had to come back home in March 2020. My parents live in another country, so I stayed with my grandma who had blood cancer and was undergoing treatment. We were super paranoid about the virus, so being together seemed like the safest option. Curiosity got the best of me and I decided to find out more about this HOA thing. Turns out it's a group of volunteer homeowners who take charge of things like fixing up the common spaces, organizing events and making sure everyone follows the rules in the neighborhood. Seemed alright at first, a way to improve our neighborhood and make it even better. But here is where things took a turn. These people started making these crazy rules and regulations that did not make any sense. Suddenly, we were told we would have to have specific picket fences, and if we hung our laundry outside, we would get slapped with a fine. It was like living in a neighborhood run by a bunch of control freaks. Let me tell you about the head boss of this crazy HOA, the president, aka a woman in her 30s who had all the traits of a classic Karen in her own Asian way, of course. She thought she knew it all and did not waste a single opportunity to tell us how backwards our community was. According to her, we needed to get with the times, which basically meant blindly following her every command. She went around preaching to everyone, pressuring them to join the HOA and sign this document that had more rules than a physics book. I mean, seriously, it covered everything from taking out the trash to where we could park our cars. Some smart parents saw through her nonsense and declined her offers, but the poor old folks were easily manipulated into signing on the dotted line. Luckily, I was there to stand my ground and say no thanks to all their HOA shenanigans. But whenever I had to leave the house, I had a virtual internship at the time, but occasionally I had to go out into the office despite the ongoing pandemic. This HOA Karen would show up at our door trying to sweet-talk my grandma into signing those damn documents. Let me tell you, my grandma was no pushover. She saw right through Karen's act and would send her packing with her own sweet talk. However, when Karen realized her charm offensive was not working, she resorted to dirty tricks. She somehow found out that my grandma was not a fan of our neighbor's dogs, so she thought she could strike a deal. Karen offered to get rid of the dogs if my grandma signed the papers. Well, my grandma was having none of it. Sure, she might get annoyed by the noisy barks, but she would never want to forcibly remove those dogs from their homes. So Karen's little deal backfired big time. Not one to give up easily, Karen started recruiting other HOA members to convince my grandma. It was like watching a reality TV show, but in our neighborhood. The whole thing turned into chaotic mess. I was at work dealing with database issues and out of the blue, I get a frantic call from my grandma. She is sobbing and that instantly sends me into panic mode. Through her tears, she manages to tell me that the HOA Karen had evicted her from her own home. My grandma tried to reason with Karen, but this heartless woman had some documents in hand, a will supposedly written by my grandma. The only problem was my grandma insisted she had not written any damn will. According to this forged document, Karen was now the rightful owner of my grandma's house. And to top it all off, she had my grandma kicked out during a frickin' pandemic. You can imagine the rage that surged through me. I was seething with anger like never before. If I was not such a decent person, I swear I would have rounded up a group of people to teach Karen and her minions a lesson they would never forget. But alas, I had to think straight, so I quickly called up a friend who knew about the law and spilled the whole story as I rushed back home. My friend insisted that I speak to my grandma first before involving the police. So I headed straight to our kind neighbor's house where my grandma sought refuge. She was in tears, crying nonstop and apologizing to me of all people. It broke my heart to see her blaming herself for something that was not her fault. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to see Karen rotting in the filthiest jail cell. After consoling my grandma, I asked her if she had signed any papers from the HOA recently. She said she hadn't, but a few days ago, a little girl had come knocking on our door asking for signatures for some school carnival. My grandma, in her innocence, accidentally used her go-to signature for official documents. Little did she know the trouble it would cause. I assured her not to worry and tucked her into bed, thanking our neighbors for their kindness. Then I reached out to my friend again. He provided me with the contact info of a cop who was known for being fair, unlike those easily swayed by Karen's money. I wasted no time and called up the officer explaining the entire situation. All I had to do now was wait. When the police finally showed up, it was a real spectacle. There stood Karen with her gang of minions right in front of my house, wearing a smug grin as if she already had the victory in her pocket. Even though I was the one who called the cops, Karen had the audacity to approach the officer and start spewing lies about me, calling me a scammer, a fraud, you name it. But thankfully, the cop had enough sense to ask her to wait while he came to talk to me. I handed over the forged documents and gave the officer a detailed account of everything my grandma had shared with me. He then requested Karen to present the documents she had in her possession. He also took a statement from my grandma and collected her signature. The cop assured us that he would be confiscating the documents to investigate them for forgery. Oh, but the drama did not stop there. Karen, in a desperate attempt to save her own skin, pulled the officer to the side. I did not need to see it to know she was trying to bribe him, but it didn't work. The cop warned her that her actions could be used against her in court. Karen's face fell as the police drove away, and I could see the frustration boiling inside her. I knew she wanted to unleash her threats once again, but I swiftly ushered my grandma inside and shut the door on her face. Our wonderful neighbors offered us their support, allowing us to stay with them until this mess could be sorted out. Thankfully, it did not take long. The documents were proven to be forged and Karen was arrested. She tried to put on a brave face, threatening to take the matter to court. In response to that, I decided to sue her and the entire HOA. As the court case unfolded, the truth about the HOA's wrongdoings came to light. The whole association was ordered to disband and Karen received a hefty fine and a prison sentence for masterminding this entire debacle. It was a sight to behold seeing Karen wail and cry in the courtroom as her punishment was announced. I could not help but feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that the person who caused my grandma so much pain would now be locked away for years. During the course of the legal battle, my parents arrived and they offered my grandma the option to move in with them. However, my grandma had grown attached to her house and I could not bear to leave her behind. So I volunteered to stay in the city and continue working at the firm where I had been interning. It might not be the highest paying job, but being close to my grandma was more important to me than anything else. Sadly, my grandma passed away peacefully in 2021, but I continued to live in her cherished home, now with my wife by my side, awaiting the arrival of our first child. And yeah, ripe stars, I guess that is both a sweet and a bitter ending. It's good that the HOA lost and the grandma won with OP, but of course it is super sad that grandma passed away. Rest in peace. Either way, if you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment because that would help me tremendously. And now let's move on to the next one, which is titled Entitled HOA Douchebag. This is the story of my entitled neighbor Bob. We live in an HOA, I know, and Bob lives across the green space from us. Bob's entitlement was evident almost from the moment we moved in. About a month after we moved in, the police, sheriff and DEA came knocking at our door. Bob had called them and told them we had lawn bags full of cannabis in our garage. It's important to note here that I use medical cannabis. Bob runs the local Narcotics Anonymous group. Well, I gave the cops the ground tour of our home and there was nothing here at all. They apologized for the intrusion and left. A week later, our landlord called because Bob had called him saying we had a grow operation going here. Our landlord knew he was lying because the landlord had just been here. Bob was trying to get us out of the neighborhood because he cannot have that crap in his neighborhood. He gave up on that when my daughter and her husband purchased the property. Then he started with the constant complaints and demands. We were not allowed to feed the squirrels because it made a mess, and we couldn't plant clover because it might get in his yard. We had to mow more frequently because he mows twice a week and we only mowed once and it looked bad. The list goes on and on. He mows the green space between our houses every time he mows his lawn, killing all the wildflowers, and tells people that they cannot walk there because he mows it so it is his. The worst of this entitled behavior started 2 years ago. He decided he was gonna stop using his furnace and burn wood instead. Now, I have lung cancer and my next door neighbor has COPD, so this was really bad for us. In January 2022, we had a stagnant air warning, which means you can only use wood stoves or fireplaces if that's your only source of heat. Bob did not care, and the thick smoke from his wood stove blanketed the neighborhood. One morning, I woke up unable to breathe. My daughter called for an ambulance, I stopped breathing and had to be intubated. I spent 6 days in a medically induced coma and another week in the hospital. My kids tried talking to him, I tried reasoning with him, but he didn't care. He said he was allowed to heat his house any way he saw fit. We called the county and they told him his wood stove was outdated and needed to be replaced. He said he would replace it, but 2 years on it still hasn't happened. The final straw for me was when another neighbor and I had an argument. It was all of 2 minutes and resolved the next day. He came over screaming at me because he was not putting up with the crap in his neighborhood. And then he screamed at me that it wasn't fair that I got disability, cancer, and he had to work all day. A month later, he was suddenly in too much pain to work. So he went on disability from his job, spending his time climbing on his roof, working on his motorcycles, mowing his yard every other day, and generally just enjoying not having to work. Someone he worked with turned him in for fraud, and we had investigators out here taking pictures of his activities around his house. I made sure to have a chat with them myself. And yeah, Ripe Stars, this Bob guy sounds like a truly nightmarish neighbor. I'm so glad I don't have neighbors like this. Anyway, the next one is a malicious compliance HOA story. Our last house was in an HOA. Our garage had our 2 pickups in it, but my husband's mechanic truck was too long to fit in the driveway without being over the sidewalk, which was against HOA rules, so he could not park it in the driveway. He parked it in front of the RV gate that had a gravel driveway. Well, one day we got a violation letter for parking on the landscaping in front of the RV gate, so I called and spoke to the HOA manager Miranda. She said that if we wanted to park there, we had to pave it. I asked her, so you're telling me that we have to pave it? She said yes, so we paved it. Then we get another violation letter a couple weeks later, this one accompanied by a fine, saying we need to get permission to pave the driveway. When I called up Miss Miranda again, I told her that we were not responsible for paying the fine, nor did we need to ask for permission because her literally telling us to pave it was giving us permission. She tried to argue against that, citing some HOA bylaws about applications and approvals and some such nonsense. I was not having it and told her that if she wanted people to follow the rules, then she should not tell people to break them. She was pissed but ultimately dropped the whole thing because she knew she had messed up. And the next one is a story from rslash am I the a-hole. So I never thought I would be in this position, but I'm the one who sought out the 75-year-old members of the HOA board for assistance. Having said that, I feel like I was very patient and accommodating, but just got pushed too far. But still, anytime you call the HOA, you might be the a-hole. My neighbors started out in February and March with a bouncy castle in their yard. I couldn't see it, but I could certainly hear it when the kids would start bouncing at 4:30 or 5 AM. It honestly seemed that the kids would wake up really early and the parents would send them outside so they could sleep. But it was incredibly loud. I had a polite conversation with the parents and they assured me the bouncy castle was temporary. I put up with it for probably 3 weeks, nearly every day, until I explained that I work nights and I was being woken up right as I was getting to sleep. To their credit, they stopped jumping early in the morning and everything was fine until 3 weeks ago when a huge bouncy castle suddenly appeared in their backyard. It was at least 25 feet tall, it completely blocked my view of the mountains. I could see the kids were able to look right into my bedroom window from the top. Unfortunately, this coincided with a shift change for me, and now the kids were up until 11 or 12, even 1 AM on some nights, and now I had to wake up at 4:30. I did not even realize it was also a water slide until I realized that probably hundreds of gallons of water had run under our shared fence and actually pushed all my dog's poop up against my back door. I went over and talked to them, and the dad essentially said, "We were polite enough to change our schedule for you the first time, and this is our backyard, so F you." I decided something had to be done because potentially my house could be damaged, let alone the sleep issue. So then I called the HOA, and however the machine works, my neighbor had been called in front of a board meeting, fined about $1,000 for covenant violations, as well as been ordered to pay for damages to our joint fence. I thought everything was good except for some dirty looks from the neighbor, but literally every one of my family and friends are saying that I'm the a-hole for going to the HOA. While opinions vary, the general gist is I'm now the crappy neighbor ruining kids' fun. Also, that I should have gotten some noise-cancelling headphones and ignored it, and they would have popped the slide at some point anyways, and it would have taken care of itself. The idea, I guess, is that I tattled and got my way by unleashing a bunch of busybodies with too much time and too much undeserved power. Am I the a-hole, Reddit? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think that OP is the a-hole here or not? Someone on Reddit said, not the a-hole. I don't typically side with snitches, but this is pretty clear. The early hour noise and the damage to the property are big no-nos. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. Honestly, going to the HOA is the bare minimum here. This is actually proper use of the HOA, which by the way guys, I would agree with, and these neighbors were putting your quality of life and possibly quality of your property into jeopardy. I'm honestly really worried for the kids. These are very irregular and ungodly early and late hours for them to be outside seemingly unattended. The parents honestly sound negligent and decided to make them the neighborhood's problem rather than actually parent their kid. This makes me wonder whether calling CPS should be next on your list of calls. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would definitely agree with that. These hours seem to be very weird for kids to be outside alone without any parental supervision, especially when they are bothering everybody. So therefore I would say OP is definitely not the a-hole, especially considering that these people damaged his property as well. Either way, let me know what you think in the comments. And the next one is titled, I guess you are salty now. I was not the perpetrator of this petty revenge, only a witness. Preface, I love my family. Every member of my family is incredibly intelligent and has capacity for great kindness. With that being said, I do have one family member, my aunt, who is, well, a full-blown Karen, haircut and all included. The setting to set the stage, I was staying with my grandma for a weekend and we decided to go visit my aunt, uncle and my cousin. Uncle was out at work, so aunt, grandma, my younger cousin and I decide to go out for lunch. We decide on Applebee's. For you non-Americans, Applebee's serves neither apple nor bees. They are an American restaurant and regular bar that has many TVs that show sports, but is definitely not a sports bar. When we arrive, we are seated at a table near the very crowded bar. We have recently been handed our menus when my aunt notices what's on the TV attracting the large crowd, which is a wrestling match. Aunt, waiter, could I grab you for a second please? Waiter, sure, are you ready to order? Aunt, in a minute, could you change the channel on the TV? Waiter, we have quite a few patrons watching that. If you want, we could try to reseat you. Aunt, no, we have already gotten our drinks and taken off our coats. Now please, my daughter is 10 and she doesn't need to be seeing that. Waiter says nothing. The waiter changes the channel to golf and immediately every patron around that particular TV is glaring at us from the bar. At this time, my grandma and I were firmly horrified as my aunt had managed to not only piss off the restaurant staff but a bunch of patrons. Shortly after we order our food, which is delivered in a longer but not unreasonable amount of time, grandma, cousin and I dig in, enjoying our normal dinner fare. Aunt then takes a bite of her food. Aunt, she spits out her food. Aunt, what the hell? OP, grandma, taste this. Sure enough, Aunt's food is about 90% salt and tastes like a big old mouthful of chewy ocean water. Me, wow, Aunt, I cannot believe that happened, understanding immediately why our food tastes completely normal. Aunt, does your food taste like that? Me, nope, definitely not quite that salty. Must have been a mistake from the kitchen. Aunt wastes no time in flagging down a waiter and complaining at length about the salt. She ends up returning it to the kitchen while angrily glaring at us eating our food. Her food returns, she goes to take another bite, it's just as salty. Her rage inflamed even more and she flags down a waiter. Aunt, hey, what the hell? This is still salty. Waiter, if the dish is not to your taste, then I guess you don't like that dish. At this point, Aunt is absolutely fuming and demands that we all leave. Grandma, cousin and I all quickly wolf down the little remaining on our plates as Aunt tells Grandma not to pay for Aunt's meal shortly before storming out the restaurant. Grandma pays the bill and tips heavily. And that is, guys, why you should never piss off the staff at a restaurant. However, I'm not really sure if the aunt understood and learned her lesson. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.